The human animal, like the gene, serves only the self. We are born believing that the world turns for us alone, and we die in the futile attempt to make it so. Free will evolved, my friends. The illusion of control is a trick of the gene, vanishing in an instant the moment we are sufficiently tempted. The gene makes a tyrant of us all. You, I now know, are the tyrant incarnate. I have fought you for my entire life, and with my last breath, I shall end you.
Bioshock 2 is a fascinatingly messy game. The weird middle child of a video game trilogy known for its gorgeous visual design, overt political theming, and people leaving their massive tape recorder journals scattered around for anyone to hear. While entrenched in the series' settings and mythologies, Bioshock 2 doesn't seem to play by the same rules as Bioshock 1 before or Bioshock Infinite after. But understand what the game tries to accomplish and what it actually accomplishes will mean getting into the Bioshock franchise in detail. For the uninitiated, hi Dad! The first Bioshock premiered on August 21st, 2007, and was an early breakout success for the 7th generation of video games. The year is 1960, and you play Jack, the survivor of a plane crash who discovers a lighthouse in the middle of the ocean, which is actually a secret entrance to the underwater city of Rapture, created by a man named Andrew Ryan. It's theoretically a place for individual free thinkers to escape from the crushing grasp of the state and the church. While building their undersea fortress, the scientists of Rapture discover Adam, a chemical found inside certain sea slugs that can be refined and used to rewrite genetic material, allowing for numerous effects on the human body, including, but not limited to, telekinesis, pyrokinesis, ice kinesis, and bees! Basically, Adam could bestow superpowers, but in order to successfully harvest it, the sea slugs would need to be placed in the stomachs of little girls. These girls, dubbed Little Sisters, would hallucinate and wander the halls of Rapture without much care, and eventually start trying to harvest Adam from corpses. And with growing tensions among the citizens of Rapture, we'll get back to that in a second, the powers that be developed the Big Daddies, genetically enhanced slaves grafted into armored diving suits, tasked as bodyguards for the Little Sisters. So you take 10,000 people, all with a very strong sense of self-importance, who all believe that they're the top shit in their field and don't like to be told what to do. You seal them up in a box under the ocean, force them to work as a community, and then you give them all supernatural abilities. Oh, and also Adam is effectively a drug that slowly drives you insane, and the only way to get more is to kill the little girls you see roaming around with their giant cyborg protectors. If you don't think that's a recipe for disaster, then dissenting factions start smuggling in guns. When you arrive to Rapture, society has already crumbled. Most of the citizens are dead or have become splicers, crazed, armed, superpowered drug addicts. And those few who haven't succumbed to madness isolate themselves to try and find ways to regain power. And if you're going to survive this hellscape, you just might have to kill a child for her superpower juice. The clearest and most talked about theme in the game is a criticism of objectivism, the philosophical system developed by Ayn Rand, the author of books like Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead. Objectivism suggests that the proper moral purpose of your life should be the pursuit of your own personal happiness, and that the only just society is one that fully respects individual rights through free market capitalism. Rapture is a society built on the philosophy of fuck you got mine, where you can put slugs in a child's stomach and kill them for their juices because nobody is going to stop you. In Bioshock, you're given a binary moral choice system on whether or not you harvest the little sisters. You can actually save them, kill the slug inside them and restore their sanity, but doing so means denying yourself the atom you need to upgrade yourself to survive in this dangerous environment. There are criticisms to make about this mechanic. The question of, do I kill a little girl or not, might be too extreme to really test the morality of most players, and the game gives you Adam from other sources to balance it out, so you're not really at a disadvantage, but the moral choice mechanics at least relate directly to the game's larger themes. Am I going to look out for myself, or will I help other people at a detriment to my own survival? Jumping ahead to the third game in the series, Bioshock Infinite, released on March 26, 2013, takes much of the same infrastructure of the first game while flipping the setting on its head. Set in 1912, you play Booker DeWitt, a private detective who finds himself drawn to a mysterious lighthouse in the middle of the ocean. Only instead of descending into a city under the sea, he ascends to a city above the clouds. The city of Columbia first appears to be a pristine utopia, led by Father Comstock and built around theological worship of the founding fathers of America. On a rescue mission to save a girl named Elizabeth, DeWitt travels deeper into the city to discover that Columbia has also brought along with it its rapid racism and systemic class oppression that also defines the American experience. There's a parallel to the first Bioshock in pretty much everything. There's superpowered juice, there's giant mechanical monsters violently protecting young women, talking vending machines, voice recordings just littered everywhere, a central antagonist who's an isolated patriarch controlling his forces remotely, a plot redefining late-game twist, and some very front and center politics, this time replacing objectivism with American exceptionalism, that manifest destiny idea of a white colonial America ordained by God. It does, quite famously, fumble the ball partway through by turning the leader of the opposition party into a bloodthirsty murderer, taking the game into a more centrist lane where both sides are bad, actually. Yes, this is a white nationalist police state, and that's bad, but a Black Lives Matter protester threw a brick through a store window, so now I don't have to engage with their plight anymore. This is a shame, since I personally found taking on the personification of American exceptionalism in the first half of the game very satisfying. Anyway, Bioshock Infinite is largely a reskin of elements from the first Bioshock, and in your first playthrough you might be forgiven in thinking that's a spiritual sequel and not a direct sequel, kinda like how Bioshock is a spiritual sequel to System Shock 2. Only for the final act to tie things back to Rapture through the use of time travel and alternate dimensions that emphasize that the similarities of the first game weren't just reusing old ideas, but were the result of the cyclical nature of time. For the series as a whole, it suggests that history is doomed to repeat itself, no matter how fantastical it ends up being, and breaking the train of oppressive systems is nigh impossible. This is reflected in Infinite's choice system. There are select moments where you are given a choice, like, do you throw a baseball at the interracial couple? Do you kill the man who did you wrong? Which brooch do you want? But these choices have zero effect on the story. Unlike Bioshock's binary morality system that results in two different endings for the game, none of the choices you make in Bioshock Infinite matter mechanically. Booker DeWitt is always marching towards the same destiny. This is not necessarily a detriment. I think gamer fetishization of choice is pretty dang silly, no matter how badly written the Mass Effect 3 ending was. Your choices not mattering in Bioshock Infinite do two things: emphasize the predestination narrative, and allow the player to internalize the main character's moral compass. Deciding if DeWitt is going to throw the baseball at the interracial couple or not doesn't change the plot 1 inch, but it does change your personal perception of DeWitt as a character. I personally think that's a more interesting discussion than, is it okay to murder children for slug liquid? So with all that in mind, Bioshock 2. Released on February 9th, 2010, Bioshock 2 sees us returning to Rapture in 1968, 10 years after the fall of Rapture and 8 years after the events of Bioshock 1. You play as one of the Big Daddies, an early prototype version called Subject Delta. 10 years prior, you were bonded to a little girl named Eleanor, but she gets taken away by a woman named Sophia Lamb, who uses mind-control powers to force Delta to kill himself. Now, 10 years later, Delta is resurrected. Oh yeah, Rapture has these resurrection booths, it's weird. And the first thing on Delta's mind is reuniting with Eleanor. As you descend into the rotting halls of Rapture, which is still somehow standing even though it was leaking like a sieve in the first game, you find Sophia Lamb has taken over the underwater city after the defeat of Andrew Ryan, herding the Splicers and other survivors into a new community known as the Family. Lamb's ultimate goal is to take her daughter, the now teenage Eleanor, who has been mostly cured of her little sister state, and turn her into what Lamb calls the Utopian, an individual mind imbued with the entire collective intelligence of Rapture, taking the responsibility of promoting the common good from the people into the hands of an enhanced being. So it's a race. Subject Delta needs to get to Eleanor in time to save her from her mother's experiments. As you traverse Rapture, you run into obstacles that require the use of Adam, which means engaging with the same "do I kill the child" moral choice system from the previous game, despite your programmed role as the protector of little sisters. You also meet a number of Lamb's followers who have all been manipulated by the family in their own way, and you'll have to decide, should these people live or die? You can summarize Bioshock 2 a lot quicker than you can the other games. Part of that is because the setting is not new. Rapture in Bioshock 2 is a bit more claimed by the sea. Coral is starting to creep in, and there are sections where you actually go outside in your pressurized suit. But the city isn't a novelty anymore. If you've played the first game, it's all very familiar to you, and a fair amount of model and texture assets have been carried over from Bioshock 1. Another reason the story feels more streamlined is because it doesn't have that major third act twist that recontextualizes the plot and motives of the main character. The details of Sophia Lamb's plan are all discovered piecemeal through the game, but it's still pretty straightforward when you put it all together. Likewise, you do gradually find out what your identity was before you were converted into a Big Daddy, but it's not a grand game-changing revelation like the other two games, or System Shock 2, but we'll talk about that game some other day. In Bioshock 2, you're just like a guy, a deep-sea diver who discovered Rapture, made a few friends in the city, got betrayed, and was turned into a Big Daddy. And discovering your identity doesn't really change your motivations or general attitude towards your mission. If the game was written like the other two Bioshocks, it'd probably be like oh yeah, Project Delta is actually Andrew Ryan, whose corpse was converted into a Big Daddy, and now he's seeing things from the other side. No. You're just Joe Average in a tin can. Some have looked at these changes and concluded that Bioshock 2 is a more rushed, simply written game meant to cash in on Bioshock 1's massive commercial success with minimal work from developers, the 7th generation equivalent of Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. But I disagree. Bioshock 2 is plenty complex, but it rejects the familiar infrastructure of the larger Bioshock franchise for something else. So let's consider where Sophia Lamb fits into the Bioshock villain pantheon. Lamb was a psychiatrist who was brought into Rapture by a reluctant Andrew Ryan after Rapture's citizens started making demands for counseling. Believing in a philosophy of altruism and doing things for the common good, pretty much the exact opposite of the guiding philosophy of Rapture, Lamb started to become popular. People were starved for actual community, and so they started to take a shining to what Lamb was saying, and began forming a society around her called the Family. After failing to embarrass her through public debate, Ryan simply threw Lamb and the family into prison, the toddler Eleanor being kidnapped and converted into a little sister. Then the fall of Rapture happened. Lamb broke out of jail, reclaimed Eleanor, and killed Delta. Lamb stayed out of sight while the events of Bioshock 1 happened, which saw Andrew Ryan dead and Rapture leaderless, allowing her to fill in the power vacuum. But Rapture is a fallen kingdom. Bioshock 2 is really a post-apocalyptic story. It just, doesn't feel that way because it's all indoors. As a post-apocalyptic story, the question becomes, how do we rebuild from the wreckage? In the other games, Rapture and Columbia are destinations, the end results of their leaders' philosophies. The tower has been built. Now all you have to do is topple it. In Bioshock 2, we're at the beginning of the process. Lamb is looking to lay the foundation of her society, the foundation of her tower. She hasn't reached Utopia yet, because Eleanor isn't Utopia yet. Which is why the politics in Bioshock 2 don't feel nearly as defined as the other two games. Most discussions of this game will bring up the term collectivism, which is not really a philosophy, but a value that is included in a number of different philosophies. Socialism, communism, Marxism. But Lamb doesn't commit to any of those larger ideas. She doesn't have a larger idea outside of the role of her daughter. In some ways, Sophia Lamb is supposed to be Andrew Ryan's opposite, matriarchal instead of patriarchal, preaching togetherness over individualism, and there's a real risk there that this could result in the same both sides centrism that plagued Bioshock Infinite. But Lamb just doesn't have a strong philosophy, outside of pop psychiatry buzzwords and a cult leader's skill of taking advantage of the poor and disenfranchised. Lamb doesn't have a strong foundation for her tower. Rapture and Columbia reflect their creators' philosophies in their architecture and art design. Ryan's Art Deco monument to man's ability to control his own destiny, Comstock's temple of American greatness. Lamb and her family are still entombed in Ryan's world. You spend just as much time going through Rapture's leftovers, including a full-blown objectivist theme park narrated by Andrew Ryan. All Lamb can really do is petty vandalism. Posters, graffiti, literature scattered about. She paints over the vision of Andrew Ryan, but is still overwhelmed by it, still trapped in the machinations of bastard men. The only way forward is Eleanor. Bioshock 2 isn't about collectivism, or at least it isn't about collectivism in the meaningful way that Bioshock 1 was about objectivism and Bioshock Infinite was about American exceptionalism. Instead, it's about what we give to our future generations, the ones who have to live in our crumbled ruins after we're gone, the ones who are going to have to actually build that tower. It's about Eleanor and what she takes away from all of this. Lamb is an abusive parent. She is controlling, keeps her daughter locked away and isolated from other people, also that she can mold her into a person she wants to be. She's the steampunk psychiatrist supervillain version of the football dad who forces their kid to play the sport because they never got it to work for themselves. Eleanor wants to reject this, to escape this, but this has been her whole life. She doesn't have anything else, no other frame of reference. Except for that brief time she was a little sister, when she had a different parental figure, a big daddy. When Eleanor finds a way to resurrect you, it is to break her out of prison, yes, but she also seeks guidance from you. She's rejected her mother and is now asking her father, what kind of person should I be? You are her savior, but you're also her guide. And that's where Bioshock 2's morality system comes into play. Once again, you find yourself with the question of either harvesting or sparing little sisters, and on the face, it's the same extreme choice from the first game, more so from the viewpoint of a big daddy. Why would a big daddy kill a little sister? But it's no longer a simple button prompt. To save a little sister, you have to jump through a bunch more hoops that constantly put you at a disadvantage. First, just like Bioshock 1, you have to kill the little sister's big daddy. You know, those hulking machine men who were already the toughest enemy in the previous game. Then, you adopt the little sister and assist her in collecting Adam from corpses. Gathering Adam is a long process that attracts splicers, who want to kill the little sister for her sweet slug juice. So you have to defend her from a wave of enemies, which can take up a lot of your health and ammo. So is she done collecting Adam? Good. Now do it again. You have to do this at least twice to reap the most benefits from it, which means constantly depleting health kits, ammunition, and the money needed to repurchase those things. Once the little sister has drained the second corpse of Adam, then you can save her, killing the slug and reverting her back to her normal little girl. Or you could save her at any other previous stage, but you would get a lot less critical Adam for doing so. You have to sacrifice a lot of time and resources to save these little girls, making the prospect of, just harvesting them right away and being done with it a little more appealing. Even more so when the big sisters show up. When a little sister has reached maturity, they become big sisters. Feral and eclipsing the big daddies is the most dangerous thing in Rapture. You have to fight them if you save or harvest the little sisters, but if you save them, you're not going to have as many resources to fight the big sisters. You're putting Andrew Ryan's philosophy to the test again. If you asked anyone, point blank, is it okay to kill a child to save yourself? The answer is going to be pretty much 100% no, except from trolling edgelords. But the more complicated and dangerous saving that child is, the more you might find yourself rationalizing. Well, you might think, it's not like a child is going to survive this hellscape on their own. The splicers would torture her, tear out her guts while she's still awake. Killing her quickly like this might be a mercy, right? It's like the dad at the end of The Mist, you know? It's the same question of objectivism from the first game, filtered through the game's new post-apocalyptic lens. If you can face all this opposition and still make the right moral choice, then the moral choice must be worth it, right? Eleanor is watching. She's watching you treat these children better or worse than her mother treats her, and she's learning from it. There's a second moral choice system in Bioshock 2, one that's more hidden. At 3 different points in the game, you'll meet people that you have the option to kill or not kill. You don't get a big button prompt like with the little sister choice. You have to figure out for yourself that you can just walk away from the situation, let them live. You could rationalize reasons to kill them or spare them. First is Grace Holloway, one of Lamb's loyal followers who blames you for Eleanor's kidnapping and transformation into a little sister. On one hand, Holloway is dangerous. She controls a lot of splicers in Rapture. Killing her could be justified as self-defense. On the other hand, she's actually a good person, who's been lied to and greatly misguided by Lamb. Next is Stanley Poole, a former journalist and double agent for Andrew Ryan, who is directly responsible for turning Eleanor into a little sister and you into a big daddy. He's a truly bad guy who personally destroyed your life. On one hand, you're probably in your right to get your revenge on him. On the other hand, can you really play the role of jury, judge, and executioner? Is death really an appropriate punishment for him? Finally, there's Gilbert Alexander, who helped develop the Little Sister Big Daddy program, but we're less concerned with his sins and more with his wishes. He wants to die. Experiments with Adam have turned Alexander into an insane monster trapped in a tank. Through his audio Last Will and Testament, you learn that he knew of his eventual fate, and he would rather die than be this dementia-riddled mutant. On one hand, this is what he wishes, and we should respect that. On the other hand, what if all life is precious? I really do like that this second moral system comes at you when you least expect it, and forces you to think about the ethics of what you're doing, about the lives you're taking. But I also think it doesn't do enough with it. Mechanically speaking, the game treats these 3 choices as the same. If you spare one or more of these people, Eleanor treats it as a lesson of mercy, but that acts as if they're all the same choice. Sparing a good person who's been manipulated down a bad path, sparing a bad person begging for mercy, and sparing a man on life support who wants you to end their suffering are 3 very different situations. You can kill Holloway and spare Alexander, and the game tells you that you've been merciful. I know that separating these 3 moments mechanically would have meant more endings and more work for the developers, but they're just not the same moral decision and shouldn't have been treated as such. It's my biggest gripe with the game. Well, my biggest story gripe, my biggest overall gripe are these goddamn hacking minigames that are impossible for colorblind people like me. Still, even if it could have been done better, the morality mechanics of Bioshock 2 are more complex and interesting than its predecessor, and obviously more tangible than when Bioshock Infinite went, actually fate rules, choices drool. When a game has a moral choice system, it's usually something that reflects on the player character. Do you end the game as a saint or a tyrant? It's definitely that way in Bioshock 1, but for Bioshock 2, it's not about how good of a person you are. It's about what lessons you are teaching your daughter. There are 6 possible endings based on the combination of your decisions in both the Little Sister system and the NPC spare and kill system, and all of them are based on what lessons Eleanor learned from you. Did she learn it's better to look out for herself or to help others? Did she learn the value of mercy or justice? At the end of the game, Sophia Lamb is defeated, the family is destroyed, and just about all of Rapture is dead. Your character, Delta, finally succumbs to a fatal injury inflicted early in the game, and Eleanor escapes, finding herself above water for the first time in her life, the sky and sea stretching out in all directions. Lamb was right about one thing. Eleanor is the future, She's utopia. She is the human race that'll rebuild after the apocalypse. And it was you, her father, who showed her how to do it. I hope you taught her right. Bioshock 1 and Bioshock Infinite are grandiose explorations and deconstructions and ludicrous parodies of big philosophical ideas, and that's great. I do enjoy shooting American exceptionalism in the face. Bioshock 2 isn't devoid of the larger philosophies, but it's more interested in things on the human level. How we relate to each other, how spite and greed and fear can poison us more than just reading Ayn Rand. Ideas are just ideas. It's how we use them, how we teach them, which ones we reject and which ones we hand down. That is what determines our future, our world. So stop and think about what you're doing. Are you helping? Are you hurting? And why are you doing it? Remember, the children are watching. Also, Eleanor is better than Elizabeth. Don't at me.